The 6-year-old girl accidentally dropped a cup, her small foot scraped by the broken pieces, yet her stepmother scolded her harshly and forced her to press her face against the curtain as she sobbed. No one came to help her until her millionaire father unexpectedly returned home after a business trip. He stepped inside and shouted one sentence that left the entire house in complete silence. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below and tell me which city you are watching from. Now, let's start the story. The afternoon in the Oak Ridge mansion was so quiet that the sound of the wind slipping through the glass windows could be heard. Inside, the polished living room reflected the hesitant steps of a little girl. It was Sophia Miller, a 6-year-old in a simple pale pink dress, her clear eyes always carrying a shadow of longing. Sophia's mother had died of illness when she was only 2, and the memory of her existed only in faint fragments. Since then, the greatest desire in Sophia's heart had been to have a mother to hold her, to hear gentle words of praise. Her father, Jonathan Miller, was a successful businessman, constantly away on business trips. 5 months earlier, he had remarried Victoria Blake, a young woman who once worked as a receptionist at his company. On the wedding day, Victoria carried a sweet appearance, always smiling at Sophia, even softly patting her head and calling her, "my sweet little girl." Innocently, Sophia believed that was the love she had always wished for. But when Jonathan was not home, that sweetness vanished. Victoria gradually revealed her bitter and cold nature, seeing Sophia as a burden, as a shadow of the late wife she wanted to erase. That afternoon, Sophia tried to do something very simple: wash a glass and carry it into the living room. She believed that if she behaved well and worked hard, maybe her stepmother would be pleased. Her small hands were still wet, and the glass slipped in a brief loss of control. The sharp sound of shattering filled the room, glass scattered across the tiled floor. One shard cut into Sophia's foot, and a thin line of red spread across the wound. Sophia panicked, dropped to her knees, clutching her foot, tears welling up. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." The click of high heels struck the floor with chilling precision. Victoria appeared at the staircase, her tight red dress accentuating her haughty look, but her eyes were blazing with fury. The face carefully made up was now twisted in anger. Her shrill voice echoed through the room. "This house is no place for a clumsy little brat like you. Look at what you've done, Sophia. You're useless." Startled, Sophia hugged her foot tighter, biting her lip to keep from sobbing. She still tried to plead, her voice faint. "Please don't be mad. I'll pick it all up. I'll clean everything. I promise." Victoria stepped closer, never once glancing at the blood on the child's leg. She pointed straight at Sophia, her voice sharp. "Kalate. Sorry? Does saying sorry make the cup whole again? Useless girl. Always clumsy, always making me look bad. I told you to behave properly, but you keep acting out and then pretend to cry so your father will pity you. Pathetic child." Sophia trembled, tears spilling down her cheeks. She staggered to her feet, each small step dragging across the cold tile floor, leaving a trail of red behind her. The heavy curtain blocked the light, and in its shadow she pressed herself close, her shoulders shaking violently. Her sobs broke into gasps, tangled with fear and despair. In her tiny heart, Sophia kept telling herself, "If I were better, if I hadn't broken the cup, maybe Mama would love me." Sophia quickly shook her head, a tear sliding down her cheek as she whispered in a tiny voice, "I don't want Daddy to be upset. I just want you to be happy, Mama." Victoria folded her arms, her lips curling into a cold smile, her eyes fixed on the small trembling back. Her voice hissed again. "Happy? You think looking like this can win me over? Don't dream. A girl like you will always be a burden. Get up. Face the wall now." The little hand slipped away from her wound, trembling. Sophia staggered upright. The small cut made every step painful, each one leaving a damp, smudged mark on the floor. She walked slowly toward the thick curtain in the living room, pressing her face against it, her shoulders heaving with sobs. Her broken voice blended with her crying. "Please don't punish me today. My foot hurts so much. Please, Mama." Just then, the sound of the front door echoed through the house. Steady, heavy footsteps of a man carried down the hallway. A familiar voice, weary yet warm, called out, "Sophia, "Are you home?" Jonathan Miller had just returned from a long business trip. He was dressed in a dark suit, holding tightly to a brand new white teddy bear. It was the gift he had picked out at the airport, hoping to make up for the days he had been away. As he stepped into the living room, the sight before him froze his body. His daughter, small and trembling, was standing with her face pressed to the curtain, her foot covered with scratches. In front of her, Victoria, in a tight red dress, was pointing her finger, her face twisted with rage, her words of scolding still hanging in the air. Jonathan froze for a few seconds. The white teddy bear slipped from his hand, rolled onto the chair, as if the shock itself had knocked it away. His heart pounded, caught between anger and anguish. In that instant, he understood that everything he had tried to believe in all this time had collapsed. Without another thought, Jonathan rushed forward and pulled Sophia away from the curtain. Her tiny hand was ice cold, trembling. He bent down and saw her feet covered in scratches, each step leaving a damp mark on the floor. Jonathan drew in a sharp breath, his voice low but commanding. "Victoria, stop right now." The sound cut through the air like a blade. Victoria flinched and spun around. For the first time in months, she failed to mask the twisted fury on her face. Her eyes flicked toward Jonathan, then quickly steadied as she forced her expression back into calm. "When did you get home?" Her voice was stiff at first, then dropped into a false softness. She was the one being careless. She needs to learn to obey. If you keep spoiling her, she'll never grow up. Sophia let out a choking sob and clung to her father's chest. Tears streamed down her face, her voice breaking into fragments as she whispered as if terrified of making him angrier. "Daddy, it's my fault. I shouldn't have broken the cup. I promise, I'll be better. Just please, don't let Mommy hate me anymore." Jonathan held his daughter tight, his hand pressing gently on her small shoulder as if to shield her from the whole world. His eyes locked on Victoria, each word striking with heavy weight. "You call this teaching? Leaving her in pain like this? She's only 6 years old, Victoria." Victoria let out a bitter laugh, her tone dripping with resentment. "You always take her side. I'm the one who lives with her every day. I'm the one who deals with her spilling things, making messes. What is wrong if I discipline her? And me, Jonathan, I am your wife. Am I worth less than a child?" Jonathan's brow furrowed, his chest rising and falling sharply. In that moment, memories flooded back, his wife passing when Sophia was only 2, leaving behind an endless void. He had thought remarrying would give his daughter someone to lean on, would make the house less cold. But now, he saw he had made a terrible mistake. Victoria's words pierced Jonathan's heart like a blade. He clutched his daughter closer, his face darkening. Rage erupted, his voice booming through the living room. "Shut up, Victoria. You were never her mother. Her mother would never punish her just for breaking a cup and then ignore her wound." That voice froze the entire room. Victoria stood motionless for a few seconds, her eyes wide, then quickly shifted into a look of hatred. Sophia trembled, perhaps for the first time in years, feeling her father's arms like a solid wall of protection. The once quiet mansion now echoed only with Jonathan's heavy breathing, Sophia's muffled sobs, and Victoria's eyes flooding with uncontrollable fury. Victoria pressed her lips together, her hand tightening into a fist, and in her gaze flashed a cold, sharp light, the sign of another storm about to break. Jonathan closed the office door, his arms still holding Sophia tightly. He set her down on the sofa and pressed a clean cloth gently against the scratch. His body trembled, and his deep, husky voice came out like a promise. "Daddy is here now. No one will hurt you anymore." Sophia pressed her face into her father's shoulder, her small breaths trembling with every beat. For the first time, she clearly felt his protection. Yet in her tearful eyes, another fear still gnawed at her. Her voice was faint, words breaking with a sob. "Daddy, what can I do so that stepmom won't hate me anymore? Why is it that the harder I try, the further she pushes me away?" Jonathan froze, his chest tightening. His eyes welled with tears, not knowing how to answer. His large hand gently squeezed her small shoulder, only a heavy sigh breaking the silence. He pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Henry, come right away. Sophia is hurt." About 15 minutes later, Dr. Henry Walker arrived. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair who had been close to the Miller family for many years. Carrying a small medical bag, his eyes filled with concern when he saw Sophia draw her leg in, the red scratch marking her skin. "It's not serious, just a shallow cut. But she needs rest and, more importantly, emotional care." Jonathan nodded, his gaze shifting from his daughter to the hallway. Victoria's figure appeared, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. Her face was cold, her eyes flashing with anger. Jonathan stepped out, closing the door behind him to let Henry work. He stood facing Victoria, his voice lowered but weighted with authority. "She is my last boundary. You've already crossed the line." Victoria curled her lips into a bitter smile. "Boundary? I'm only teaching her. You always defend that girl, always put her above me. You should be thanking me for correcting her, instead of treating me like the enemy." Jonathan looked straight into her eyes, his voice dropping, every word heavy. "That is not teaching. That is cruelty." Victoria burst out laughing, the hollow sound echoing down the hall. "Cruelty? No, Jonathan. You're just afraid of losing your little doll that you used to make up for your dead wife. You don't truly love her. You're only trying to ease your own guilt." Jonathan clenched his fists, veins standing out on the back of his hand. In his eyes, anger swelled like a wave. He no longer saw a wife before him, only a stranger filled with malice. He turned back into the room. Sophia was having her wound bandaged by Henry, her eyes wet with tears though she tried to stifle her sobs. Jonathan swallowed hard, his hand tightening, his voice ringing with finality. "Tomorrow, I will end this marriage with you. I will not let my daughter live with you another second. We will divorce, and you will leave this house. Do not appear before her again." The next morning, Jonathan's study was heavy with silence. On the wooden desk, the divorce papers were already laid out. Jonathan sat across from Victoria, pen in hand. He didn't speak much, only looked straight into the eyes of the woman who had shared his life for the past 5 months. Victoria crossed her arms, her face void of emotion, yet at the corner of her lips lingered a faint smile full of defiance. Jonathan finished signing and pushed the papers toward her. Victoria slowly wrote her name, then set the pen down. Her cold gaze drifted past him to Sophia, who was sitting quietly on the chair next to her father. Before leaving the house, Victoria bent down, her voice low but hissing with venom. "Did you think you escaped me, Jonathan? You'll see, I'm not so easy to get rid of. Both you and that little girl will pay for this." The door slammed shut, leaving behind an icy emptiness. Jonathan gently squeezed Sophia's shoulder, but even he could feel unease spreading inside him. That afternoon, when the sun had softened, a knock sounded at the door. Jonathan opened it and saw Eleanor Brooks, the woman who lived next door. She was about 55, thin, her graying hair neatly tied back, a small box of freshly baked cookies in her hands. Eleanor had been a longtime neighbor, usually gentle, rarely interfering in anyone's affairs. But today, her eyes carried an unusual resolve. "Good afternoon, Mr. Miller. I brought some cookies for Sophia." Her voice was soft but hoarse, as if it had taken all her courage to speak. Jonathan invited her in. In the living room, Sophia sat curled up on the sofa, clutching a white teddy bear tightly in her arms. Seeing her like that made Eleanor's throat tighten, her eyes glistening. She walked slowly toward the child and set the cookie box on the table. "Sophia, I brought cookies. Would you like to try one?" Her voice trembled, though she tried to keep a gentle smile. Sophia looked up, her clear eyes filled with caution. She shook her head and hugged the stuffed bear tighter, as if afraid that if she let go, the only sense of safety she had would disappear. Eleanor turned to Jonathan, lowered her voice, almost to a whisper. "Mr. Miller, I have to be honest. I've seen, many times, Victoria yelling at the little girl. Once she even made her kneel outside in the cold. I thought about reporting it to the authorities, but I was afraid I didn't have enough proof. I'm sorry for staying silent for so long." Jonathan froze, a sting rising in his nose. His face sank under the weight of guilt, realizing he had let his daughter endure loneliness and suffering far more than he had ever imagined. Sophia heard it, her small shoulders trembling. She lifted her head, a faint glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes. though still hesitant. Her voice came out as soft as a breath. "Auntie, is it true you saw me being bad? Is that why Mom hates me?" Eleanor stopped short, tears filling her eyes. She sat down beside Sophia, took the child's tiny hand into her frail palms, and spoke with a trembling but steady voice. "No, sweetheart, you are a very good girl. The one who is wrong isn't you. It's the adult who treated you unfairly. You must remember, you deserve to be loved." Sophia looked at her, lips quivering, eyes shimmering with tears. She clutched the stuffed bear against her chest, and for the first time in many days, let a small smile appear, uncertain, but real. Jonathan sat across from them, quietly watching. He gave Eleanor a slight nod, thanking her with his eyes. Then he lowered his voice and admitted the fear that had been gnawing at him. "Thank you, but I'm afraid Victoria hasn't stopped yet." Eleanor stayed silent for a moment, then slowly nodded. In her eyes flashed a trace of fear, as though she sensed that somehow Victoria would find a way to return. That afternoon, when the Oakridge mansion had fallen silent again, after Victoria had quietly left, she did not return to her old home but instead rented a small apartment in a shabby neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Inside the narrow room, a dim yellow light cast shadows across her cold face. She wore a long black coat, sat upright, and her eyes carried both fury and calculation. The door creaked open. A large man with a scruffy beard and a wrinkled shirt stepped inside. It was Richard Hale, 40 years old, someone Victoria had once known through a gambling debt. He let out a mocking laugh, his voice rough and hoarse. "Out of money already, rich lady? You don't look any different from someone thrown out onto the street." Victoria clenched her teeth, forcing a smile, though the hatred in her eyes was clear. "You think I'm going to lose? Jonathan will be brought to his knees if Sophia disappears from his hands." Richard raised his eyebrows, sneering as if he had just heard a cheap joke. He pulled out a chair, dropped heavily into it, and leaned back. "You dare touch the girl? I thought all you knew how to do was parade around in that mansion." Before Victoria could respond, a knock echoed at the door. A woman walked in, her wavy brown hair cascading over her shoulders, lips painted a bold red, her gaze sharp though her voice dripped with sweetness. She was Melissa Grant, 35, a woman with a history tied to multiple financial fraud schemes. She sat down, crossed her legs, and spoke in a soft but calculating tone. "Why waste your breath arguing? I know how to make Jonathan open that safe without lifting a finger. The girl is the key. As long as we take her, Jonathan will pay whatever it takes." Victoria was silent for a moment, then nodded, her eyes flashing with malice. Richard slapped the table, chuckling darkly. "Fine, this sounds like fun. I'll handle the men. Melissa will do the planning, and you just need to play the role of the abandoned stepmother." The three of them locked eyes, no further words needed. In that suffocating little room, a scheme had just been born. At the same time, at the Oakridge mansion, Jonathan sat across from Sophia in the dining room. Dinner was simpler than usual, lacking the extravagance of the meals when Victoria was there. On the table there was only pasta, a small salad, and a glass of milk. Jonathan tried to create a relaxed atmosphere, but his eyes often lingered on his daughter's face. Sophia held her fork, eating slowly. After a while, she looked up, her voice cautious. "Dad, are you going on another business trip?" Jonathan set his fork down and gently squeezed his daughter's hand. He looked straight into her eyes, his voice slow but firm. "No, this time I will stay. I won't let you be alone anymore." Sophia lowered her head, pressing her lips together. Then suddenly, she smiled faintly, a fragile smile that still lit up the quiet room. Jonathan tightened his hold on her hand, a determination rising in him stronger than ever before. In the dim corner of a bar near downtown, Richard Hale picked up the phone, his voice low and steady. "Tomorrow night, we begin." At that very moment, Jonathan was watching Sophia sleep peacefully on the sofa, completely unaware that the real storm was quietly drawing near. That night, when Sophia had fallen asleep, Jonathan tucked the blanket around her and stood silently, his phone lying idle in his thoughts. Somewhere else, Richard closed his own phone. While here, Jonathan drew the curtains tighter. The next morning, the doorbell rang. Jonathan set down his coffee cup and went to open the door. Standing before him was a woman with neatly tied black hair, calm eyes, and a badge in her hand. "I am Detective Maria Santos, Child Protection and Criminal Investigation Division," she introduced herself briefly, her voice clear and steady. "I received information regarding psychological abuse and threats. I want to hear directly from you and any witnesses if possible." Jonathan invited her in. Sophia was sitting at the dining table, holding a colored pencil, glancing occasionally at the stranger. Jonathan gave a concise account of what had happened, the divorce, and the threats Victoria had left behind before leaving. Maria took notes, occasionally looking up to ask for details, her manner never cold but measured, making those across from her feel reassured. A second knock came at the door. Eleanor Brooks stepped inside, holding a box of cookies. She hesitated slightly when she saw the woman in plain clothes but carrying a badge. Jonathan gave her a nod to reassure her. Maria invited her to sit down and opened her notebook. Eleanor looked at Sophia first, her gaze warm as if asking permission, then turned to Maria and took a deep breath. "I know she is capable of doing something even more terrible, the child. She needs protection." Maria nodded, her tone low but firm. "I will not allow this to happen again, but I need solid evidence. Any recordings, photos, other neighbors who can confirm. Can you help me connect with them?" Eleanor nodded immediately. "I'll speak with the Parkers across the street. They once saw the little girl being forced to kneel outside in the yard." She turned to Jonathan. "If necessary, I will testify." Sophia watched the adults talking, her hand still moving the pencil across the paper. She drew a white bear, then added 2 long, dark shadows standing behind it. When she finished, she quietly brought the sheet of paper and placed it in front of Jonathan. "Daddy, look!" Jonathan looked at the drawing. The white bear stood upright, and before it were 2 blurry dark figures. A chill ran down his spine. He held his breath, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "You draw beautifully." But inside, a deeper unease settled. Maria bent down to look, asking nothing more about the picture. Instead, she spoke softly to Sophia. "Can you show me the places where you usually sit to study, or where you open the windows? I need to check the safety inside the house." Sophia nodded and led Maria around. Maria quickly checked the locks, the window frames, the hallway cameras. She noted the blind spots and instructed Jonathan to add extra locks to the children's room windows. Before leaving, Maria stood in the doorway, giving short, precise reminders. "My phone is always on. If you notice any unusual sign, call immediately. Tonight, keep the backyard well lit. I'll have patrols pass by more often." Evening settled in. Jonathan called a handyman to install extra locks on the second-floor windows. Sophia sat at her desk doing homework, her pencil gliding across the page, pausing now and then to listen to the drilling in the hallway. Eleanor stopped by briefly, bringing a list of 2 neighbors willing to testify. Jonathan thanked her and carefully placed it into the case file. Night fell, and the house grew quiet. Jonathan made hot cocoa, planning to bring it upstairs for his daughter. Upstairs, Sophia bent over her spelling assignment. A faint click sounded at the window frame. She looked up. The outside breeze pushed lightly against the curtain edge. The window latch seemed not fully shut. Sophia walked closer, intending to pull it closed, when she saw a folded piece of paper lying squarely on her desk, as if someone had slipped it past the curtain and let it fall. Her small hand hesitated. Sophia looked around, the room silent, except for the ticking clock. She bit her lip and opened it slightly. The bold letters were short and cold. "Don't lose the girl, or you will regret it." Sophia's throat tightened. She placed the paper down and stepped back, her eyes fixed on the desk as if afraid the words might leap off and speak aloud. She did not know whether to call out or keep quiet so her father would not worry. She drew in a breath, still undecided, when the bedroom door opened. Jonathan appeared holding the cup of cocoa. He smiled, but his eyes were immediately drawn to the sheet of paper on the desk. He set the cup down, picked up the note, read it once, then again, as if refusing to believe what he saw. The color drained from his face. Jonathan snapped his head up, looking at Sophia, then at the window latch left ajar. His hand crushed the paper until it crumpled. He spun around and ran into the hallway, his voice calling down the stairs, tense but controlled. "Sophia, stay right there. Eleanor, are you still nearby? Maria, I need you here right now." Jonathan clutched the paper tightly in his hand, speaking on the phone while hurrying down the stairs. In less than 20 minutes, the doorbell rang. Maria Santos stepped in with a man in a dark shirt, his frame solid, his eyes sharp and observant. "This is Officer Kyle Bennett," Maria introduced briefly. "My partner, in charge of technical work and surveillance." Jonathan didn't waste words. He handed the paper over immediately. Maria put on gloves, read slowly, nodded once, then looked up. "This is not an empty threat. They have already started the plan." Kyle moved closer to the second-floor window, inspecting the latch and the edge of the curtain, his voice low. "There are faint fingerprints, probably left with gloves. The latch is newly installed but has already been tampered with. They know this house." Jonathan poured coffee, but his hands were trembling. He sat down, the hot cup in his hands offering no comfort. "Whatever they want, I will give, as long as Sophia is safe." Maria shook her head, her voice firm yet calm. "No, you cannot show weakness. Money will only make them come back. We will set a trap to catch them once and for all. Tomorrow night you follow the schedule I arrange and leave the rest to us." Jonathan looked straight at her. "What do you need me to do?" "First, turn on all the backyard lights at a fixed hour, then switch them off at exactly 11 p.m. to create a false blind spot," Maria explained, writing notes while pointing at the house diagram Kyle had pulled up on the tablet. "Second, move Sophia to the study instead of her bedroom, but keep the hallway light on upstairs as usual. Third, attach a silent alarm to this window. The alarm will notify the patrol car without making any sound inside the house," Kyle added. "We'll place hidden cameras on the back porch and in the planter. If anyone breaks in, we'll close the net within 30 seconds." The sound of small footsteps touched the stairs. Sophia stood at the bottom step, clutching her teddy bear, her eyes wide. She had heard a few words, her voice trembling. "Daddy, what if they take me away?" Jonathan stepped over, kneeling down to meet her gaze. He pulled Sophia into his arms, holding her as if to shield her from any storm. "No one will touch you as long as I'm standing here." Maria came closer, lowering her voice, her smile gentle yet serious. "Sophia, I need you to help me with something small. Tomorrow night, if you hear your dad say the words, 'lights on,' you will sit down on the chair and count your breaths with him, all right? 1, 2, 3, up to 10. While you count, we'll be doing our part." Sophia nodded, breathing deeply in rhythm with Maria. The little girl's face was still tense, but she had something to cling to now. Jonathan looked at his daughter, his gaze softening, then hardening again as he turned back to Maria. "I will follow every step exactly." Maria slipped the paper into her file folder and gave a quick instruction. "Tonight, lock the windows twice. Do not open them unless you hear the password. Any strange noise, call me first. Do not go outside alone." Kyle installed the silent alarm and double-checked the cameras. Before leaving, Maria touched Jonathan's shoulder lightly, as if passing on a promise. "We are very close by. Don't face this alone." Night fell thick over the other side of the city. In a gray-painted room, Richard Hale spread a map of Jonathan's neighborhood across the table. He slid his finger toward the back door, his mouth curving in a faint grin. "This way. I tested the lock yesterday. At 11, the hallway lights go out. The backyard is dark. The left fence is easy to climb." Melissa Grant sat across from him, laptop open, one earbud in. She was checking through disposable cell phones and a new SIM card. "I'll send the message at the right time. One number, one demand. He'll know he can't call the police. Everything clean, no trace." In the corner of the room, Victoria sat silently, back pressed against the chair, her hands clutching a worn ring. Hatred flickered like fire in her eyes. "Make it quick. I don't want to see his face for more than a minute." Richard glanced over, his smile dry. "Calm down, lady. Your money will be in your pocket. As for more than a minute, leave that to me." Melissa closed her laptop and stood up, her voice sweet but chilling. "The exit route is ready. Car parked behind the old warehouse row. Each of us has one task, no improvising." Richard tightened his grip on the folding knife, then tossed it back onto the table again, a restless habit. But his voice came sharp, final, stripped of any ornament. "Tomorrow night, the girl will be ours." It was 5 minutes to 11. Jonathan put on his coat, kissed Sophia on the forehead, then pressed the car lock outside in the yard, deliberately making the sound loud. He drove out the front gate as planned, circled slowly, then turned into the back alley where Officer Kyle Bennett was already waiting. Jonathan returned through the side entrance, stepping quietly into the study on the first floor. Sophia was already sitting in the armchair, holding her teddy bear, her eyes fixed on her father. In the hallway, the lights upstairs remained on as usual. In the darkness of the back garden, Detective Maria Santos signaled for the ambush team to spread out. Next to her stood Sergeant David Cho, the arrest team leader, solid in build, his voice short and calm. "Hold position. Wait for the signal." Kyle made a final check of the hidden camera in the flower bed and the silent alarm set by the window of the old classroom. Jonathan sat down, pulling the chair closer to his daughter. He whispered, his hand resting on her back to steady her breathing. "All you need to do is trust me." Sophia nodded ever so slightly. "Dad, I'm scared." "And I'm not," he said slowly, "because I'm here with you." The side gate gave a faint creak. A shadow slid over the fence. Then a second. Maria nodded at Cho. Inside, Sophia heard the wind slipping through a crack. She gripped her teddy bear's ears tighter. Jonathan gently touched her shoulder. Lights on. Sophia began to count silently in her head as they had practiced, each breath steady and slow. At the back door, the lock clicked. The door opened just enough for Richard Hale to slip in first. Melissa Grant followed closely, her perfume sharp in the air. Victoria Blake came half a beat later, hood pulled low, her eyes flashing with bitter malice. Melissa whispered, "Hurry, before he comes back." Victoria leaned closer, her voice hissing through clenched teeth. "That child, she's going to pay." They crept along the back hallway like shadows sliding across the floor. Richard stopped at the threshold of the study, peering inside. In the warm yellow glow of the desk lamp, all he could see was Sophia's small back and the silhouette of her father leaning over her. He raised his hand to signal. 3 steps. 2. 1. Just as Richard's fingertips brushed the edge of the chair, Jonathan snapped his head up. He pulled Sophia tightly into his arms while pressing the button hidden under the table. The lights around the house burst on as if it were midday. Maria's voice thundered from the back porch. "Police! Don't move!" At the same time, the silent alarm triggered the signal. Cho's team stormed through the back door, and 2 more officers flanked the side hallway. Richard staggered back, but it was already too late. Kyle slammed him to the floor, the cuffs locking around his wrists with a metallic snap. Melissa retreated toward the kitchen, her hand fumbling inside her bag, but a female officer blocked her path, her voice sharp and commanding. "Drop it!" The second pair of cuffs clicked shut. Victoria froze for 2 seconds, then bolted toward the half-open window as if to escape. Maria was already waiting, striking her arm aside and pinning her against the wall. "It's over, Victoria." Sophia trembled uncontrollably, the counting in her mind shattering apart. Jonathan held her closer, bending over to shield almost her entire body with his own. "It's over, sweetheart. You did so well." Her ragged breathing slowly steadied, her small hands clutching the fabric of her father's suit. Richard was yanked to his feet, his face twisted in fury, his eyes cutting toward Victoria as if to lay all blame on her. Melissa bit down on her lip, avoiding Maria's piercing stare. Victoria turned her head, her hood slipping back to reveal a face contorted with rage. She screamed, her voice tearing through the air. "I will not let you get away with this." The handcuffs tightened. The patrol lights swept across the road. Richard, Melissa, and Victoria were escorted out of the mansion, while Jonathan stood on the porch holding Sophia, pressing her close to his chest until the sound of sirens faded away. The next morning, the case files were transferred to the prosecutor. A few days later, the court set the trial date at Manhattan Family Court. The courtroom lights were bright. On the right side was the prosecution's table. On the left, the defendant's bench. On the raised platform, Judge Patricia Coleman appeared, around 60 years old, straight-backed with a clear voice, known for her integrity. She scanned the room, tapped the gavel lightly. "Begin." Detective Maria Santos presented first. She stood tall, file open, her voice steady but firm. Maria recounted the investigation process, the setup of the trap, the placement of cameras, the silent alarm, then pressed play on a recording taken from a burner phone used by Richard. Through the speakers, his voice was hoarse and curt. 11 o'clock, back door. The girl is the key. The entire courtroom went silent. Maria closed the device and added, "We recovered gloves, lockpicking tools, and an escape route plan. The intent to extort is undeniable." Next was Eleanor Brooks. She stepped onto the witness stand, tissue in hand, took a deep breath, then looked toward Sophia sitting beside Jonathan. Her voice trembled but did not break. "I saw Victoria leave the little girl outside in the cold many times. One day, the child had to kneel for a long time just because she spilled water. I stayed silent too long, afraid I had no solid proof. Today, I cannot stay silent anymore." She handed the court clerk 2 written statements from the Parker and Diaz households next door. Judge Coleman nodded, accepted them, and made quick notes. The defense attorney tried to cut in, questioning viewing distance, questioning the lighting at night, but Eleanor answered clearly. Maria supplemented with patrol times and neighborhood camera images that matched the account. The chain of evidence tightened link by link. Jonathan was called. He stood, his hand still resting on his daughter's shoulder like a new habit, then walked to the stand. He gave a concise account of the divorce signing day, of Victoria's threats, of the anonymous note left in Sophia's room. When the prosecutor asked, Jonathan looked directly at Victoria, his voice dropping. "I tried to believe in a peaceful family, but what you did to my daughter was never discipline." He paused a moment, then spoke each word distinctly. "You were never a mother, and you never will be." Victoria leaned back in her chair, giving a dry laugh, her red lips twitching slightly. "You'll regret turning your back on me. You have no idea who you've just crossed." Her eyes darted quickly over the spectators, searching for something to cling to, but she found nothing except cold stares. The prosecutor's closing words were brief. "Conspiracy to extort, unlawful entry, endangering the safety of a minor, all organized and with an escape route prepared." The defense rambled about impulsive motives, about how no harm was done yet, but the physical evidence was already on the table. The air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the sound of the gavel. Judge Coleman adjusted her glasses and delivered the verdict, her voice not loud but firm. "This court finds the defendants, Victoria Blake, Richard Hale, and Melissa Grant, guilty of conspiracy to commit kidnapping for extortion, unlawful entry, and endangering a child. Based on the evidence and consistent testimony, the court hereby declares." She paused for a moment, glanced at the defendants, then brought the gavel down. "Guilty. Sentenced to multiple years in prison, according to the sentencing guidelines for each defendant. A long-term protective order is granted for Sophia Miller. Court is adjourned." The gavel struck, sharp and final. Court officers escorted the 3 defendants out through the back door. Richard lowered his eyes. Melissa kept her head bowed, while Victoria looked back, her gaze still full of resentment, but with nothing left to hold on to. Jonathan returned to his seat. Sophia stood, clutching her father's hand tightly. Her face still showed traces of tension after the long wait, but her eyes were no longer as lost. She looked up and whispered, her voice so soft it seemed afraid of breaking something fragile. "Daddy, are we really a family now?" Jonathan bent down, pressing his forehead gently against hers. He closed his eyes, drawing in a long breath, as if to gather everything that had just happened, the recordings, the testimony, the gavel's echo, and the tiny hands that now needed a new promise. His throat tightened. He opened his mouth, but the words had not yet found their way out. The sound of the gavel still echoed in his memory when Jonathan bent down, pressing his forehead against his daughter's. He did not speak right away, only held Sophia's hand tightly and guided her out of the courtroom, each step slow but steady. In the hallway, he leaned closer and whispered, his voice steadier after such a long silence. "Daddy heard you, sweetheart. From today, I will answer with actions." A few months later, Jonathan's work schedule became lighter. He handed more projects to his associates, personally drove Sophia to school, came home in time for dinner, and at night sat beside her reading books. That morning, father and daughter went to their scheduled therapy session with Dr. Leah Simmons. She was around 40, a child psychologist, her warm voice and steady gaze giving those in front of her a sense of safety. The therapy room was simple, with a shelf of colored pencils and a few notebooks. Doctor. Leah sat across from Sophia, her smile gentle. Today, why don't you try to tell your story in writing? It doesn't have to be perfect, just honest. She slid a blue-covered notebook toward the girl. Sophia held the pen, glanced at her father. Jonathan gave a small nod. She bent her head, writing slowly, pausing a few times to take deep breaths. After a while, she pushed the notebook toward Dr. Leah. On the page, in neat handwriting, were the words, "I'm not afraid anymore." Doctor. Leah looked at Jonathan, then back at Sophia, her eyes warming visibly. "Thank you, sweetheart. That sentence is powerful." She turned to Jonathan. "You are doing the right things. Children trust the rhythm of consistency, being picked up every day, eating together, hearing the truth. Keep it that way." On the way home, in the car, Sophia hugged the notebook to her chest. She turned to her father. "Do you think I spelled anything wrong?" Jonathan smiled and shook his head. Not a single word was wrong. She let out a small laugh, clear and brief, but bright enough to light up the whole car. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. Eleanor Brooks came in carrying a tray of butter cookies. The warm smell filled the living room as she stepped inside. Sophia ran to her and wrapped her arms around her. "You came just in time to fill a big empty spot at our dinner table," Jonathan teased gently. Eleanor laughed, looking at the two of them, her eyes moist but joyful. That kind of empty space only needs flour and love to be full. They sat together, eating cookies while drawing. Sophia picked up a pen and sketched a white bear, this time standing in the middle of an open doorway, with golden light shining outside. Eleanor tilted her head. "Your bear looks stronger." Sophia nodded, grinning. "Because it has a home." At night, the simple meal felt warm, no longer suffocated by silence. Jonathan poured sauce over his daughter's food, poured milk with his own hands, then sat down beside her instead of staying glued to his phone as before. Sophia reached for the teddy bear on the chair and placed it on the table, serious as if setting a place for a family member. She looked up, her eyes shining. "Our family is complete now, Dad." Jonathan stared at her for a long time. In that moment, all the days of racing after work, the nights of coming home late, the misplaced trust in another adult, came together into a quiet resolve. He wrapped his arm around his daughter, his voice low but steady. "I will be here, and I will never leave." After dinner, the two stepped out onto the porch, the yellow light spilling gently across the steps. A passing breeze stirred the wind chime into a soft tune. Jonathan opened the blue-covered notebook and set it on Sophia's lap. "Do you want to write anything more?" She shook her head, hugging the teddy bear to her chest, resting her head against his shoulder. "I've written enough." A little later, Eleanor rose to say goodbye. She paused at the door, turned back to look at the father and daughter, and smiled as if laying down a heavy stone. "It feels so warm tonight." Jonathan nodded. "Thank you for being here all this time." She waved her hand. When adults stand where they should, children will always find their way home. The door closed. The house fell quiet. Jonathan looked at Sophia and spoke softly, as if promising himself. "Tomorrow, we'll plant another flower pot on the porch. Our home needs more green." Sophia nodded, her eyes sparkling. "I want white daisies." Before bedtime, Jonathan pulled the blanket over her, turned off the bedside lamp, and stayed a while longer. Sophia turned on her side and whispered, as though afraid to break the peace they had just built. "I already have light now, Dad." Jonathan smiled, placing his hand on her forehead. "Keep it, and if it ever dims, I'll light it again." At the foot of the bed, the teddy bear sat upright, its round black eyes reflecting a faint glow from the lamp. Outside, the city still roared, but inside this house, the rhythm of breathing was steady. A family was slowly learning how to be together again, clear, deliberate, and whole. 3 years later, on a chilly autumn morning in Oak Ridge, the kitchen window was slightly open, the faint smell of burnt butter mingled with the aroma of coffee. Jonathan turned the pancake just in time so it wouldn't burn, then set it on a plate and poured a little syrup over it. Sophia, now 9 years old, her hair neatly tied back, a name tag pinned to her sweater for the school art fair, sat at the table painting the final strokes on a small canvas. A white bear appeared in the corner of the yard, behind it an open doorway, and inside, a dining table with 2 people sitting across from each other. She stopped, tilted her head to study the picture, then smiled to herself. Jonathan placed the plate down. "A family-themed piece?" Sophia nodded. "I changed the title. Now it's called The Door with the Light On." "That's beautiful," Jonathan said, pulling up a chair beside her. He had kept the habit of asking her about every detail of her day, from art class to reading assignments. His schedule had become steady, mornings driving her to school, quick meetings at noon, coming home early to cook dinner, evenings reading, weekends volunteering at the community center. The Lighthouse Foundation he had established 3 years earlier now ran safety skills classes for children, parenting workshops, and a free counseling hotline. Maria occasionally taught classes, Eleanor managed the pastry table at every event, and Dr. Leah led the art therapy group on Thursdays. The doorbell rang. The mail carrier handed him a thick envelope stamped by the Department of Corrections. Jonathan stood on the porch, his fingers tightening around the edge of the paper. It was something he knew would arrive, yet each time he opened it, it felt like touching an old scar. He inhaled deeply, tore it open, and scanned quickly. A notice of a victim impact review ahead of the scheduled parole hearing for one of the 3 convicts. Nothing surprising, just another part of the legal process. Still, his chest sank for a moment. Sophia appeared at the doorway, holding her painting, her eyes moving from the letter to her father. "What is it?" Jonathan didn't hide it. "A court notice. They want to hear from people who were affected. I'll go with Miss Maria. You don't need to worry." She set the painting down, thought for a moment, then asked softly, not with the fear of years past, but with the honesty of a child who had learned to speak her mind. "Are you tired, Dad?" Jonathan gave a faint smile. "Yes, but even tired, I'll go. Because I go to close some doors and to open others." He tapped the edge of the letter lightly, then folded it. "And I go to tell them that our house still keeps its light on." The school art fair bustled with children's music and bursts of laughter. Sophia placed her painting on the stand and clipped her name tag beside it. Eleanor arrived early, carrying a basket of cookies. Her eyes widened when she saw the painting. An open door like this means the light is welcome inside. Then she set her dish nearby and whispered like sharing a secret, "I'll put a plate of cookies under the spotlight. Cookies need a little light too." Dr. Leah also stopped by. She wore a cardigan and a badge that read volunteer. She bent down to Sophia's eye level. "Do you remember the sentence you wrote last time?" "I'm not afraid anymore," Sophia answered, her voice steadier than 3 years ago. "Right. And when someday you feel a little afraid again, what will you do?" "I tell Dad. I breathe with you. I draw another doorway." All 3 of them laughed together. "Doctor," Leah gently touched the girl's shoulder. "Very good." A smaller girl, about 6 years old, stood staring at Sophia's painting. Her mother was at the registration desk holding a lighthouse flyer. The girl pointed to the white bear. Sophia bent down. "Do you like bears?" The child nodded. "I just came here. I didn't bring anything." The simple words carried a weight Sophia understood instantly. She glanced at her own teddy bear tucked inside her backpack, one ear worn, Eleanor's little stitch still showing. Sophia opened the bag, hugged the bear for a second, then placed it in the other girl's hands. "His name is Milo," Sophia said. "He knows the way home, but he likes to stay with someone who needs him." The girl hugged the bear tightly, her eyes shining. "My name is Mia." Jonathan stood a few steps away, watching without stepping in. Some moments were better left to grow in silence. He simply lifted his phone to take a picture, then slipped it into his pocket, as if storing a fragment of time. The following afternoon, Jonathan and Maria went to court. It was not a trial, just a review session, in a smaller room with softer light. The coordinator, Counselor Janet Reed, about 50 years old, specialized in working with victims' families. She explained the procedures, how statements would be recorded. Her steady, warm tone made the tense room feel less confining. Maria rested her hand on the case folder. When you're ready, just speak the way you do at home with your daughter." Jonathan looked at the sheet of notes in front of him, a few scribbled lines. But when he opened his mouth, he did not read. He spoke about the night the lights came on, about the threatening note, about the child's hand gripping his as they counted breaths. He did not name names, did not accuse. He only spoke of what was taken away and what his family had done to rebuild. He ended with a short sentence. "Our home still keeps its lights on, and it will keep shining. I hope the justice system shines enough to make sure no child ever goes through this again." Counselor Janet wrote notes, nodded. "Thank you. Your words will be part of the record." Leaving the courthouse, Maria slipped her hands into her coat pockets, her breath turning into thin clouds in the cool air. "You were concise and clear. Good." Then she tilted her head, narrowing her eyes in a playful tease. "Tonight, don't work. You already have a house with lights on." "Got it," Jonathan replied, half smiling, half relieved. That evening, the porch light glowed warm. Eleanor set fresh baked pastries on the table, chuckling when she noticed Sophia did not hand her the bear to hug as usual. The girl explained about Mia. "I lent it to her, but I think maybe Milo wants to stay with her longer." Eleanor looked at Jonathan, then back at Sophia. "Then I'll help you sew a new coat for Milo to send along to Mia." "With your old blue floral fabric?" Sophia asked, her eyes lighting up. "Yes, because things that once kept us safe will keep protecting others." Jonathan sat down, pulling his chair closer. "Tomorrow, we'll bring Milo's new coat and a basket of pastries. But tonight..." He poured milk and set it before his daughter. "Tonight we'll have a small celebration. For a new doorway." Sophia bit into a pastry, frowning thoughtfully as if choosing her words. "A doorway has light from both sides, from outside in and from inside out." She looked up at her father. "I think our house already knows how to keep the lights on." Jonathan laughed, nodding. "You said it better than I could." Night settled. After Eleanor left, Jonathan and Sophia sat on the porch. The breeze was gentle, the wind chimes clicking softly. Sophia rested her head on her father's shoulder. "Are you still worried about court?" "Yes," Jonathan admitted. "I worry, but I'm not afraid. Because fear is darkness, and worry still means the light can stay on. Then I'll worry with you. Just a little." Jonathan placed his hand on her forehead. Just a little. Inside the house, the blue-covered notebook lay open. Sophia picked up a pen and added a line beneath her old words. "I'm not afraid anymore, and if fear comes back one day, I will turn the light on." She set the pen down, blew gently to dry the ink, then handed the notebook to her father. Jonathan read, his eyes softening with a quiet warmth. "This sentence will stay with us for a long time." "Like Milo," Sophia said, then corrected herself. "Like Mia." They turned off the porch light, but the lights inside the house stayed bright. Near the door, the painting "The Doorway with Lights On" had just been hung, framed in wood Jonathan had built the weekend before. In the painting, the little white bear now wore a blue scarf. In the bottom right corner, Sophia signed her name, adding a tiny dot. 3 years passed, and that small dot perhaps became a reminder. We walked through the dark without losing the way home. And every night, if something pressed on the heart, one could still do something simple: turn on the light, pour the milk, call each other by name, then whisper like a new habit learned. The story ends with the light of love, but it also opens up a lesson that each of us needs to remember. The wicked will eventually be punished, and the good will always be rewarded. Victoria, Richard, and Melissa paid the price for their greed and cruelty, while Sophia finally found a true home with a father who awakened to his responsibilities and dared to protect his daughter with all his love. That is the noble message that Story for Heart wants to share with you. Nothing is stronger than love, and nothing is more steadfast than justice. No matter how long the darkness lasts, the light will always appear in the end to warm the hearts of the small and fragile. And now, I want to hear from you, our dear audience of Story for Heart. If you were in Sophia's place, would you have the courage to believe in the light ahead? And if you were Jonathan, would you dare to let go of work in order to fully embrace the role of a father? What do you think about Victoria's ending? Did she deserve what she got for all she had done? And do you believe that as long as we choose love, Happiness will always return to us, no matter what pain we have endured. Finally, may I ask you something? Where are you listening to this story right now? Are you at home or on your way back from work? I hope you feel warmth in your heart and gain new faith after accompanying us through today's story. Thank you for staying until the very end with Story for Heart. Please leave your thoughts in the comments, because your words are the source of motivation for us to continue bringing you even more stories that touch the heart.